provide testimony in strong support of this resolution, which requests the governor to convene a blue ribbon reconciliation commission to examine and formulate a reconciliation process relating to issues of past, present, and future importance to Native Hawaiian people, the state of Hawaii, and the United States of America. The governor fully appreciates and joins with the legislature in efforts to unite our community through a meaningful process of reconciliation and representing a shared vision of what Hawaii's future will be. He is committed to a participatory and meaningful process that includes ongoing productive dialogue, including but not limited to land use and stewardship, environmental protections, economic stimulus, cultural representation, and the advancement of science. Again, we strongly support this legislation and are honored to convene this effort should the legislation be adopted. Thank you very much.
But I would like to convey the strong support on behalf of the department for this type of approach that the resolution puts forth to engage in a true conflict resolution opportunity, to provide a framework outside of the means that have been traditionally available to all of us, to engage the community, to engage important members who have been a part of this conversation for decades and who bring us now to this point where we do need to think differently and we do need a framework for doing that. So we appreciate this opportunity. We will work hard with all who are committed to this to stand up a commission that is reflective of the community, that engages the neighbor island voices, that engages the different voices, and creates a safe place where these conversations can be had and that we can find a way forward given the historical complexities, given our political complexities. We believe that this is the right way to move forward, and our department has reviewed the resolution, understands the process, sees the flexibility that it provides, and looks forward to ensuring that it does what it can for this to be successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think the thing that resonated the most with a lot of the testimony we received and also some of the commentary we received from OHA specifically and a lot of other groups is that if this is to succeed, it needs to be bottom up instead of top down.
Yes.
And the language of the resolution right now is very broad. So I was wondering what the governor's office is going to, if this does pass, kind of what efforts you guys will make to make sure that this is a bottom up kind of community-generated approach instead of the governor appointing, a handful of people to then kind of dictate what the process is going to be.
We are hopeful that when the resolution passes, maybe even before, we'll begin the outreach to the various sectors in the community, including the various Native Hawaiian groups, and ask them to participate in the process, maybe being helpful by naming appropriate representatives to us so that we can be sure that we have balance on the commission. And most of all, we're looking for folks who would be willing to be full participants and who will respect the process and help us come to a reasonable reconciliation. We're not here to grandstand, and we're not here to pick cronies of that sort, but we really want the active participation of the various groups in our community.
Okay, and then as a quick follow-up, one of the questions I have, and one of my concerns, a couple years ago, I was part of this AHA process prior to the TMT being given permission to start construction. And what ends up happening is that people who maybe disagree with some of the state's actions will look at the state's own reports and own commissions and say, you didn't live up to your own obligations. So have you had discussions with any of the legislative leadership? Because realistically, a lot of things that should happen, that should come out of this commission will cost probably billions of dollars if you're talking about GHHL and OHA and making that whole. So do you have any sort of commitment currently from legislative leadership that would kind of give reassurance that this isn't going to be an empty gesture?
We have been in extensive discussions with legislative leadership over a period of time. I've only been around for the last 6 months, but certainly in my tenure on the job, there have been extensive discussions. We meet with the leadership weekly, and this is an issue that comes up all the time. I think I sense a real commitment on the part of legislative leaders such as yourself, and we would welcome your input as well into this process. You know, it's a relatively new thing for all of us to be looking at this on such a broad scope. And I think maybe, you know, we all are vested in coming to a good reconciliation. You know, we all have to live here. And I think we all want to participate together in creating a world, a community that really is us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Thank you for being here as representative of the governor. I have a question for, it could be the governor's representative. Linda, if you would stay up there. Yeah, that'd be great. You know, there's a lot of the testimony has expressed frustrations like, oh, we've been through all this before, and what is this really going to do? Is this going to make a difference? I think process is going to be really important, and there are examples of truth and reconciliation processes that have occurred in other countries around the world in dealing with the issues that have faced Indigenous peoples, First Nations, elsewhere. Have you have models that you are wanting to emulate in setting up this process so that it really is a consultative process, as the Attorney General said, provides safe places for people to come and speak, and people feel like this is going to be constructive and not just saying something and having it go into a vacuum. So what do you look forward to as models so that we can make this really effective and not just another futile exercise?
You're absolutely right, and that's a concern of ours too. So I'd like the Attorney General to address this. She spent a lot of time looking at what other countries have done in working out issues with the Indigenous people that they have in their lands. So
thank you. Yes, if you would please, Attorney General, thank you for being here, and if you could please address that question.
Yes. Absolutely, and it's not just the work that we've been doing over the last year that I've been on the job, but obviously many people in this room and throughout our community have been looking at these models for decades. And the idea that they have happened and they have had success is very important. Countries like Canada, which is obviously involved in a unique degree here in Hawaii, given what's happening on Mauna Kea, has examples of reconciliation commissions, truth commissions. South Africa presents a very good example as well. New Zealand provides a good example. There are models that have worked that are out there, and the idea that this commission will be challenged with fleshing out is how it can work here in our community, how it can work here given our historical structures and issues and complexities. But we do think that there are ways that this kind of approach can get past a lot of the other issues that have been barriers, I think, throughout the different AHA processes, throughout the different processes that we've seen both at the federal level and the state level. It'll bring it here. It'll bring it to a place where we can set up a framework that can be resolution-driven, that can be reconciliation-driven, and that allows us the ability to look to those models and allows the commissioners the ability to look to those models. So they do exist, they have succeeded, and the handful that were mentioned in the resolution are just a handful of examples that I believe will provide good frameworks for the commissioners. And of course, the executive is going to have a coordinator position, I believe, that's also set forth in the resolution. That's important because that demonstrates that there is going to be a commitment on the part of the executive to handle the coordination aspects, the administrative aspects, to make sure that these processes, as they're developed and designed, can actually happen. And I do understand that there is a commitment on behalf of the legislature to make sure that those positions are funded, which is important because it gives it structure and it gives it the type of tools that are needed to be designed appropriately and to have the kind of success that we hope it can.
And it seems that in order for this to work here, the process really has to come from the Native peoples themselves, and it has to be appropriate and Pono for what works here. So it's not just taken from somewhere else only, but has to come from within. So what do you envision in terms of the process of this group to set up the process? I mean, you may have to take a two-step process to come up with an agreed upon protocol to move forward. How do you envision that?
Right, and I think part of the issue that's important here is it's not so important what I envision. It's very important what the people who will be stood up as these commissioners envision. And that is the whole point that Vice Chair Todd mentioned, and you as well, regarding where this impetus has to come from, where these voices have to come from. So the structure that we as the state can provide is important, and it's there, and this resolution provides for it. But in terms of all the different voices that are going to come into that conversation about what is appropriate, what protocols are appropriate, this is not the first time we've been through this. As you identified, the AHA was a very important moment where different decision-making processes got to play out and got to be a part of where they came to the final resolution. Was there conflict? Yes, there was. Was there mechanisms that came organically through that had a voice and had a place? There were. And so we're looking to those examples, at least from the executive side, to be able to provide that in this context as well, from a support side, but also from the side that there will be true engagement coming, as you said, from the bottom up, but with the support and the understanding and the guidance as necessary from my office and from others in the executive.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions? No? Okay, the chair has some questions, either for you or for Linda. What is, since you guys had the opportunity to see this resolution, what is the timeline that you guys are envisioning that you would be able to get this Blue Ribbon Commission together? And when do you predict to have outcomes ready for the people to review?
I think there are two parts to that. One is, this is something that my understanding is the governor's office has already been looking at. These are the types of things that many people in our community have been talking about needing to put into place, and this resolution puts it in place. But the governor has been doing a lot of thinking on this already, and I think it's ASAP is when his role as set forth in the resolution takes effect. He's already looking at that. He's already considering that. He's already reaching out to different groups. So that's happening even now. And in terms of the timeline for the process, I think, again, that goes to giving the ability to the commissioners to set the time frame, because they're the ones who are going to be really taking the deep dive in this, looking at what kind of models are there, what kind of process they need to develop. And I would hope that soon after being stood up, that they would publish a timeline, that they would give us the type of understanding of what they believe they're going to need and the time frame within which they're going to need that. So my understanding is that's, again, giving the commission the type of flexibility it needs, but all of us who are involved in this understand this has to happen now.
So in that note regarding it'll be based off of the commissioners, one of the concerns the chair has is that who gets selected as a commissioner. Because this resolution is so broad, there's no assurances that the governor would pick members to represent all islands. We have a number of entities, civic organizations, a lot of entities that support and work with the Native Hawaiian community, and how are they going to be represented? So can you tell me how many commissioners you intend to have, or how are these commissioners going to be selected, or moving forward, how do entities or individuals who want to give their manao moving forward, how are they going to be able to participate if they're not a commissioner?
I'm happy to answer that too. My understanding is that the governor is going to really cast out a very wide net. We know who many of these voices are because we've been hearing them not just in the last 8 or 9 months, but throughout the many years that in particular Mauna has been at the forefront of our radar. And these voices are the voices that I believe the governor is going to be reaching out to. As Chief of Staff Takayama said, there are institutional frameworks, and you mentioned the civic clubs, you mentioned a lot of other frameworks that exist that can be pulled into this, and I believe, just given the record of the governor in pulling in the neighbor islands into this conversation, and also by identifying Mauna Kea as one of the first areas that will be the focus of this commission, recognizes that the neighbor island input is going to be critical and very important to how this is stood up.
Okay, well, I would like to express some concern because I've been chair of dealing with Hawaiian affairs for 2 years, and I think I have not met with the governor or their representatives from the governor's office on talking about the many issues that legislatively come through this body. So I'm hoping that you take the process of selection is very important and not based off of different criteria. Many people have different opinions of how this should move forward. And so we believe all positions are important moving forward. The other question I have is that one of the criticisms or concerns brought out in the testimony is that this then will impact the current process or situation regarding TMT. Is this meaning that TMT is on hold until this Blue Ribbon Commission is complete, or how are these two issues intertwined?
That's a good question. With the complexity of TMT and all the different players who are involved in there, I think the issue is it is clearly a part of the question of Mauna Kea. So it is clearly a question that this commission is going to be stood up to address first and foremost. And you are right, there are a number of different voices in just the TMT component, international voices, astronomer voices, cultural practitioner voices. The fact that that is the first area that is going to be drilled down on, I believe, is because the intention is to make that the first place where those voices get heard. So that's my best understanding of why Mauna Kea is there and why it's going to be the first.
Okay. And the chair appreciates, understands why the reso was written so broadly, because we didn't want to define or parameters that would exclude any entity. But at the same token, when it is so broad, it'll take a lot of resources by the governor's office to get everybody's input. So is there going to be a lead agency, lead entity that will be taking on this task, or is it going to be only to the governor's office? How do you foresee moving forward if this resolution should pass?
The very first order of business is appointing that coordinator, that executive level position, who is going to be the one who is going to be setting up the different initial framework for selection. As you've identified, the selection of the commissioners is the key place that this is going to have to take us all first. But setting up that executive level coordinator position to make sure those meetings are taking place in this initial stage, to make sure those voices are being heard, is the key area. Excuse me, and I believe that's where the governor is going to focus his efforts first.
Okay, so it'll come out of the governor's office.
Correct.
And his resources to address all of that.
Correct, and the fact that I'm here, and the fact that others are here and supporting that demonstrates that this is not just one department. Obviously, Department of Land and Natural Resources, University of Hawaii, my office, everyone who has played a role on behalf of the administration and part of the institutions are going to be committed to this process as well.
Okay, the chair has a limited understanding of the emotions. I have lived different lives than those that are in the audience today. However, one of the things that is very apparent is that they don't want to, or at least the reports given to me is, they don't want to go through a process that has a predetermined ending. They don't want to share their emotions or, their path to get to where they are and have it, again, let down without some type of fair or open process. So I guess then the question then is, since you guys are going to be coordinating this, can you share or explain to this committee, like, what do you envision? What is this Blue Ribbons? If you had your way, what would it be addressing, and where do you go from here?
Right, and again, I believe, Chair, that the best answer there is that it's not going to come from the governor's office per se. The governor's office is willing to provide the resources of the state, the resources of the department, the resources of his office, but this is going to come from the commissioners who are stood up to be a part of this initial process of determining exactly what those processes are, listening to the voices to decide what the best model is for this moment and for our community, and that is the most important first step in order to make this the type of process that you just described needs to happen in our state.